So when I zoom out, you will see these different chapters about templates of information that kind of help you to guide you what would you need to write in proposals. So when I zoom in the first stages, we are talking about problem ideation, then solution ideation, and you can see a lot of sticky notes. I'm not going to go too wide into this, but the main thing that we started off was thinking about how do we leverage decentralized blockchain and AI, and kind of talk about how do we solve an issue of disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. And then we get down into like a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and retrieve insights. And off that note, we had like a very multi-session long discussion, like how do we get it even more scoped down, something that we can start off, and then we focused on community collaboration. So when I zoom down, we did this problem ideation and solution isolation again to scope down even further. So I have a progress bar here, which kind of shows where time is spent, like each box is 30 minutes. And this is how much we have kind of spent on this these workshops we're having. So each workshop is kind of focusing on different areas, for example, proposal title or proposal type and taxonomy, stakeholder network, defining success. And today's our topic will be proposal roles. So basically we are here to teach ourselves and the audience and how to get ideated and how to use the template. So it's like a mix of all things, but in doing so, we also learn about what is this collective proposal we have in running through different sessions. The current problem statement and solution statement, which we are now working on, is open source data platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other. And our solution is to create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. So if I go back to this our session again, they are now going to look at these community standards and like what roles you would need in order to establish that like these community standards. Here what I have on the white sticky notes are like a guiding information, what information we will be looking for, and there is a box of like some not like create examples of what roles could be and like information where you can find more to make it easier to kind of cross-check like, do I need this role or not in my proposal? So if we go deeper, then in this chapter, the team will outline the roles and responsibilities of each team member. This includes describing the specific skills and qualifications that are needed for each role, as well as the expected experience and qualification of the team members. And then once we have selected our some of our roles, today we won't go like through the full all of the roles, but we spend a bit of time ideating on them, then we spend time selecting them and reasoning them. And if you're able to do that much, I think this will be a very successful session. In order to make it simple to start, I would actually now move a little bit left onto chapter 7, where we had key performance measurements. So what we did here, we kind of created this outputs and outcomes. Each yellow sticky is like an output and an outcome. So for example, standard documentation is output. Around here, we have a lot of KPIs. We're not going to focus on KPI measurements, but only the outputs and outcomes which are written in these bubbles. Copy paste them to the right side, so it's easier to kind of grab them later on. And these will be our keywords to be ideating on roles. For example, standard documentation. Anybody from audience, what do you think we would need in order to create, actually, there is these yellow ones too, in order to create standard documentation that includes how to integrate, how to manage data, how should the information be visualized, how do we collaborate, how to integrate tools. what are the first roles that come in mind in order to know that you have a right person to do standard documentation? Alternatively, if no ideas come up, like, what does standard documentation need? And there is this list of sticky notes I brought here that we could simply cross-check. Do we need coordinator in order to get standard documentation? I would say yes, not directly, but there should be somebody who is helping to kind of find the documentation itself and understand where the information is found. Perhaps because now if we go a bit deeper, we also discuss about we have two different events and workshops as outputs, because now when we look at the scope of what we want to do with the standard documentation is create like a team of people who are coming together in order to share insights, share their development plans, share their needs and what they need from an AI platform that can help them. And you definitely would need a coordinator to kind of get these people connected. Another one would be, do we need an accountant? For standard documentation, perhaps not. But if we kind of look beyond, there is another thing we also want to get out of this proposal is a rule book, how reputation is shared between contributors and developers. And that would be important because you want to create this kind of effect where everybody involved feels like they are contributing and they also get fairly compensated for their time and like ideas they put into this framework. And this or not one other output of that would be rewards, and definitely accountant would be needed to manage that. So somebody who is like more precise and like follows the ruling and of like how to reward people. So when we talk about designer, do we need a designer for standard documentation? And how would anybody reason why it's needed? Anybody wants to share their thoughts? And
yeah, I'll give it a shot. I think it would make sense to put together a framework, template type structure for the documentation, because otherwise everyone will write in their own style, their own formats, own shape. So it would make sense to have a standardized set of rules, I guess.
And that would be a designer's area to make this a specific style of format, or you would...
what kind of a designer are you talking about here? Graphical designer?
That's a good question. We could go more specific, and I think it would be actually... So if you say specific style format, you will say like architect designer or something.
Yeah. Yeah, like a style designer for the documentation more than, yeah, I mean, there are lots of designers. There can be a software architect designer. There can be a graphical user interface designer. But this, what I was referring to specifically was somebody designing the structure and the templates of the documentation, how it should follow, how it should break up into sections and chapters and footnotes and linking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great one. And what I like this is actually being specific, like what kind of style, because it's going to help also the proposers and not proposers, but the voters and assessors who are looking at your proposal to understand, like if I wouldn't have been specific or like what kind of designer, this would have made the question from proposal or assessor, like what kind of designer will need. So yeah, that was great input. Anybody else wants to add a new roles that you already would think that standard roles or we would need in order to create like standard documentation, a rule book, how the reputation is shared, tasks, activities, any of that we have talked so far? Or something that is on as a white sticky note
Hey gang, this is Newman. A translator, like to translate the standard documentation into other languages.
This is a good question. What is copywriter? Actually, does somebody here knows? Although this leads to a link, I keep forgetting.
That would be someone who actually does the writing of the content.
I think we definitely need a copywriter in this case then.
Yeah, I think, well, it depends. If you have a community contribution, I guess if it's like a wiki type documentation, many people will be contributing, but you probably make sense to still have a single person that will review everything and make sure it's up to standard.
Yep, that is a good call. Reviews documentation. So from the list of on the left, the product developer, community manager, product designer, all of these, I would think they would be not related to standard documentation, except perhaps marketer. Would we need to market documentation, or would that not be the goal and we should focus on marketing the product and the standard documentation is secondary? Or would you see value in marketing also the documentation?
I don't see value there, but I think I see value for, so we said copywriter, so I'm a little bit indifferent adding this other one called the research writer, because but I think for documentation, a research writer is even much more important than the copywriter, except if we are putting them to mean the same thing, then that's not important. But again, answering your question, for marketer, I don't see it being relevant to this.
All right. Can you repeat, instead of copywriter, what would be then the role that reviews documentation?
So I not necessarily, so it could be different. It could be another role itself, but I know that for documentation, a research writer is much more important.
Research writer.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So when
and again, we also missed the place of an editor.
But isn't copywriter an editor?
Not necessarily, but obviously roles can be combined.
Okay, so
I think the typical role of a copywriter would be the person who produces the material, and the editor would review it, suggest amendments, and so on.
So actually, in that case, a research writer would be the one who is producing the material, or the research writer would be somebody who thinks of the context, then the copywriter would produce the material, and the editor will basically review the documentation. Would that make sense? Or I'm missing something?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like a lot of bureaucracy, though. I guess it also really depends on the size of the project, the amount of material that has to be created, the amount of research that needs to be done,
Yeah, this can go quite crazy compared to the information we already kind of slightly touched, like how to integrate tools with Select. So when we look at this small, without the circles, this mind map, this was actually the ecosystem of these people coming together, like in a way that they work together, they get rewarded together. And what they are building is the platforms themselves, the basics platform and their own platforms, and making it sure that from one platform, you can simply, for user perspective, turn in features from a different platform or turn in features in from a marketplace. And currently the marketplace we started off as a first integration will be the SingularityNet AI marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, then we have tasks and activities, which are also needed when we do community collaboration. It would be nice that everybody kind of is on the same page of who is doing, and they're fairly costed and understood the priority. And so I would actually even put a project manager into these areas of when we talk about basically the rule book of our reputation is shared, and because the output of these rule books and the way people are contributing will require a project manager. Does anybody wants to add some roles more? And what would be needed in order to create this kind of collaborative environment? Kind of largely mentioned coordinator, so I'll also bring it here. And accountant, I guess it's more relevant in this section. Would we need an analyst to look at how people are contributing and what they are working on? Or that would be, like you mentioned, too bureaucratic, that when we say, hey, you are working on this task and you're also working on this task, do we really need an analyst to kind of find these similarities or coordinate the work activities? Anybody has thoughts on that?
I would probably think no. Not at first.
So moving on, we have events and workshops. So when we do events and workshops, what kind of roles we would need? And I'm going to put somebody new on the spot, perhaps the Richmond himself who just joined, and see if you're able to catch on quickly. There is no wrong or right answers, simply from the top of your mind. What would you think? What roles we would need in order to create an event or a workshop in order to work on standard documentation for interoperable AI features?
Okay, I heard someone mention that ask if analyst will be needed at one point.
But would the analyst needed in establishing outputs of events and workshops?
Our discussion right now is on the workshops and events. So are we looking for a role, or we are looking a role?
Yeah.
There's already a coordinator and a work.
Yes, correct. Previously, we thought about coordinator as somebody who is managing these teams together to kind of coordinate the tasks and activities and what parts of documentation they're doing. But again, I think you're totally right that they are also part of coordinating events and workshops. Yes. So a coordinator will be quite a big role in all of this. Would we say that facilitator, people like me coming together, trying to streamline, push people to a specific direction to answer questions?
Yeah.
And a data manager, someone to keep track of the people who are coming in and what they are actually responding to.
Data manager sounds like quite a high-level role. Would it be possible to scope it down to something specific?
Okay, I think that
maybe a community manager instead of data manager, if this work would be collecting and aggregating feedback.
Yeah.
Well, anything else that comes up in what we would need in order to have an effective event or workshop?
I think marketing would be pretty important. And I know earlier, I think we said marketing wouldn't be so important for the standardized, well, for the standard documentation. But I think, in fact, it would be, so that different groups from different AI products could actually become aware of it. If there was no marketing, how do you get engagement?
So marketer of increasing awareness of events and updates. So if we do change something in standard documentation, marketer will be the person who helps to kind of establish that, hey, there is a new update, check this out. Is this a new feature that you would also want to enable in your platform?
I thought more that people are even aware of the documentation in the first place, that this is a resource for how to make these tools work together.
That's a great one. what else we would use? We have quite a strong video editor here, and one of the outputs of events and workshops will be videos. And I would actually double click on this one because I think we definitely need a video editor here, but not maybe not even a usual one, video editor / timestamping. Because when we started this proposal several months ago, and it's still in the scope, one of the first features that is meant to be launched on this platform would be the aggregation, or not dissemination, and aggregation of video information, video data. So for example, we are in this call, we're discussing roles and ideating roles and making sense of what we need in order to make this proposal effective in a team size and understand what are our scopes. Now, in that platform, if that would be available, we would put that video in. It would get our, what people said, what kind of information, and then store it in a database in a way that we can use large language modules or some other models to ask what was the summary of this meeting. Or when we have multiple of meetings in a row, then we could aggregate what were the key outcomes of these 3 sessions together, or what are the main focus points, or what are the action points. So basically leveraging AI information to manage our videos. And where right now we kind of having this meeting, but we always have to have some note taker and person who later summarizes to make it useful. But if a lot of time passes, it still will be a work to kind of find this information, and it's all up to the archivalist who is timestamping or making sure this data is available to make it easier to find. So yeah, back to this. I think video editor, because output these are videos. I'm gonna pull that as a red sticky note, and we would need a video editor for this, and somebody who timestamps and makes it easier to consume by an AI. So on that new information, are there any new roles you would think we will need in order to produce good videos or have a successful events? I think we need a new type of designer. I'm not sure is it a UI designer, but I would say artistic designer for creating slide decks for events, for thumbnails, for videos, all this nice to look material.
Yeah, those who the person who will be making the flyer or any marketing material, I think that can fall under the artistic designer.
So you would say marketer already is the designer?
Yes, there'll be a graphic designer and a marketer. The marketer will come up with strategies to move around and attract people into events, and the graphic designer will be the one to put down the art in a DG form for sharing by the marketer. I don't know if that's making.
Yeah, made a lot of sense. And yeah, I updated also to graphic designer. That sounded much more friendlier name or role. So we're halfway through going through these options, but considering the time, let's take this another half in like a one go. So we have this standard documentation we're working on. We're getting people together to collaborate on them. We're setting up tasks, events, and to kind of get this information out. We have marketers, we have designers who keep it full. And most of the people who join in these events are participants. So we want to make sure they're feeling good and they're having great time. Then this means we have facilitators in that. kind of cover slightly this part. There are a lot of community groups and entities coming in order to build that platform. However, this is not really an outcome of having these. But one thing these people will discuss is licenses. And I think that would also require to have a legal person, somebody who would understand, but I don't even know how to call this. Would that be a lawyer who could help with licensing products? Does anybody know?
Not really.
Not really. Same here.
Legal advisor.
And let's say legal advisor. Sounds better indeed. And the main part of the thing, when we get, well, the core is standard documentation, but why we do this is to build platforms and microservices and execute the use cases. So let's bring this platform in. And now I think we would need in these people like analysts who are capable of understanding the differences of the collaboration models, the integration models that are used, how the training models are planned, to make it so that it's easier to have this interoperability compared to some other ways of interacting. Then once again, I will say we would need, do we need a project manager? Because if the project manager comes from each team themselves, would this proposal team require a proposal manager? I think they still would need to kind of coordinate when the workshops happen. So yeah, I'll answer my own question. Of course, we need. Do we actually need? So that's a cool point. Let's tackle this hard question. Do we need product designers, product developers as in proposal teams, or as a proposal team, we are able to fully focus on helping to build the standard documentation? We get these people and teams who have the experience together, but we don't develop the platform itself, but simply the documentation, how to do that. And we leverage the teams and kind of finance the teams to build on top of these standards. Would we need these product designers and product developers ourselves to have in-house information, or could we leverage the open source community to take that part?
I think for now we can consider both of them. If we have a team, if the team has a product manager already in there, someone who can play the role, then we can leverage on that. But if there is no one available, then I think we can also leverage on the community as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. But so it was an if statement. So when they don't have, would it be expected from our team of whoever is going to be accountable of this proposal, have developers in place to go into their team and help them to implement these standards? I think that would be quite a heavy task, though.
Yeah. I don't know. Depends what the ambition is of this project, because that is a very high engagement requirement.
Yeah.
Our solution is to introduce interoperable AI features. Would introducing mean implementation? Because one thing we do want to do is scope this proposal down, although what is mentioned, how big the scope is, when we zoom out, to the main thing where we actually wanted to start with building an infrastructure, then we definitely would have developers and expertise to do that. But in this current scoped down version, we just looking at one component. So instead of looking at the dashboard, AI bots, training data, we are focusing on community collaboration. And that kind of took us down to this requirement to create standards. So I think for now, let's not focus on bringing developers into this proposal yet and try to establish that collaborative environment of how we could do stuff.
Okay, that's cool too.
Yeah. And of course, like we had the opening slide, things may break and some stuff changes. So if over time we find that actually we might need to increase the scope in order to make this proposal more useful for these teams, then of course we can come back to this. So I'm gonna delete this stuff, and let's actually there is also links to this job description templates in LinkedIn. Do we have an even bigger list of things we could go through? Like if I zoom in, we have like agile coach, anthropologist, animal groomer, care specialist, creative director. And this is a great way to also just browse through what are the roles the world has kind of described, and would any of these fit to our needs. And they actually kind of describe, so when we said marketer or facilitator or community manager, we could find these matches most likely in job descriptions and find these skills, what these roles would require. But for now, we are going to do the brain exercise, mental exercise, however you want to call it, and come up with these skills ourselves. So when we take the roles, let's start with just the random ones from each section. Let's say standard documentation would need a style designer for documentation. When we pick a style designer for documentation, where we would need to reason, focus on experience that is relevant to your proposal, reason why this role is needed. And we did mention one thing, like the documentation would require specific standard, require specific style and format to be easier to read. Would there be anything else why this role is needed? If nothing pops up, then the next one would be expected experience and qualification for this role. So if you are planning to recruit additional team members, please state what specific skills you will be looking for in people you recruit, so readers can see that you understand what skills will be needed to complete the project. So when we want to recruit a style designer for our documentation, how do we know that he's qualified? What kind of experience we would want from him?
So the person should have some documents which can be showcased.
Would it be enough? Yeah, I guess usually documentation, I guess, are co-created. So existing documentation he has been part of.
Yes, and a prior experience in styling standard documents or any documents of relevance.
I wonder, would that be the same thing? Because if he has existing documentation he has been part of, it most likely means he also has prior knowledge to write that.
Yeah.
Then let's take another one. Let's jump into the next segue. For example, events. Let's take graphic designer. Why is graphic designer needed? We did put two things up here. And these were slide text and thumbnails. And slide text for introducing content and guiding people in the events and workshops. and thumbnails for videos. Anything else that comes up that we could use graphic designer for?
I was about saying flyers and other media, but I think that will be in the slide decks, the introduction guidance.
Okay. Now, expected experience and qualification for this role. Well, I guess we would also, in the same way, existing graphical work he has done before. Would that be all? Yeah, I was thinking, like, if you, for example, style for designer, do we need any prior knowledge of AI or blockchain to be part of this, or would that not be needed?
I wouldn't say for the style designer, no.
For the graphic designer, that would be a nice have, but not necessary. Like, there are things we call nice have when you're recruiting.
All right. So this was a quick like showcase of how to do roles. So if you will do your own proposal that way, so how it would end up is you're going basically through all of these roles you have gone through, and you can, the way we ideated, we took some from KPIs, but you can leverage the entire Miro board to find what kind of roles we would need, and you find, okay, we are working on risks. I can GPT-3 is here. Do we need people specialized in these large language models, knowing these specific niche things? And then you can come up with roles that you would kind of need. So once you have created your role list and you have reasoned and understand why you need them in your proposal, then the next thing would be to find these accountable people. And today we are going to skip these 3 next columns, but I will walk you quickly through them. So you list your team and state what kind of aspect of proposal each person will work on, their relevant experience, to qualification, and proof of experience. And sometimes there are a question, what is a proof of experience and qualification? In our terms, in what Catalyst have also worked, is even a LinkedIn profile would be enough for some. And I have heard that not many people actually have that. And so it's something where people can go to and read about you, and perhaps some existing work you put up there, or and most likely the easier way is to kind of share your social links, whatever that may be, so that those who are assessing your proposal can follow the breadcrumbs and see if you're somebody who would be capable of to be in the position of this role. Once you have kind of pulled in all the roles, you have a bunch of accountable persons. And in previous Catalyst proposals, there was also an ask of summarizing your relevant experiences of current team, so aggregating all that together and making a good blurb out of that. And that would be the end of chapter 3, or chapter 9, proposal roles. It sounded, and it is as straightforward as I just showed you, ideating, reasoning, and then putting together the team. Any final feedbacks on how this session went? Is these kinds of sessions useful? Did you learn something about the proposal of the big plan we had? Anything works?
No, thanks for your time.
Yes, Tivo, this is very educative, and we'll be happy to have you again. So whenever you are less busy, just let us know, and then we'll find a slot for you in one of our meetings again at African Town Hall.
But yeah, thanks for then having me in this Africa Town Hall, able me to share my projects and the like guiding and learning material we are creating as we go. So this will be part of also the learning material, people to go through a different education material. Will have these videos as a context, like if they would need an extra help.